I hope viewers will excuse the fact that I'm in bed. It's one of the advantages of a smaller channel. You can afford to be a little bit unprofessional in that sense. But I've never made any pretenses. My channel isn't. It's not a news station. It's not. I don't have a state of the art studio or something like that. I make videos when I feel like it. Basically, I'm in bed, a bit tired, so I'm going to rest after this. But I want to talk about this whilst it's fresh in my mind. And it's really an extension of what I mentioned regarding the Scottish Sentencing Council. I'm disgusted by their position, to be quite honest, which is basically that if an offender is under 25, they're basically not criminally liable. So what they're effectively saying is young adults between 18 and 25 won't really be responsible for their own actions because supposedly the brain isn't developed enough. Now, this is news to me, and you would find contradictory studies that show actually brain development moves very fast at early age. Um, but if they're really saying that a 24-year-old doesn't have the brain fully developed, how do they then explain how legally a 24-year-old, 23-year-old etc. They can legally drink, they can legally smoke, they can legally drive, they can legally get married, they can join the armed forces, they can have their own business. They're an adult. And they're young, but they're an adult. That's the point. So I find it infuriating that they are actually having this position that, well, their brains aren't fully developed, and we've got this international research to back it up. But to me, that suggests that they have went out of their way to get that research. They're ideologically motivated. Um, I thought the Sentencing Council in England and Wales was detached. My goodness. I have huge sympathy for victims of crime in Scotland because that's what they're up against. Now, I'm not totally against community sentencing, but it has to be enforced and it has to be tough. Um, the SSC has this video where it's showing how, well, actually, community sentencing isn't the soft option, and they have this offender who's talking about his experience, and they have criminologists from various universities talking about how effective it is. One guy was enthusiastically promoting it. Well, community sentencing may have a place for non-violent crimes. It may have a place. I'm not against it in principle, but it has to be enforced. And I also feel that where you get violent crimes, or particularly heinous crimes, premeditated murder, as opposed to um, murder where there's more murky issues involved in terms of self-defense and so on. Um, Premeditated murder, high-level drug dealing, terrorism, sexual offences, these sort of things, the idea that those sort of criminals should be walking the streets, to me, is absolutely perverse, insulting, and dangerous. It's actually dangerous because it enables dangerous people to be out there. And I get the argument, if they go to prison, they'll only be more bitter and they'll reoffend. I'm not saying prison is perfect. I think prison definitely needs reforms. And I can understand the problem of overcrowding. Well, I've long argued that at the very least, it should be considered building more prisons. Yes, it's costly, but so is the cost of recidivism from having problems in prison. For example, you get four inmates in a cell for two. They're going to be that's going to add to tensions, and the whole mechanism will make them more likely to reoffend. I've always supported reforms within the prison system, but prison does have a purpose, and the public have a right to be protected from dangerous people, a fundamental right. Um, Apparently, it's also a scheme's also been rolled out in Scotland that the police won't even investigate so-called more minor crimes. They've basically given up. This is incredible. Now, I appreciate that the police cannot solve every single crime. I get that. Um, And I get that if they have a choice, for example, between a murder investigation and someone's bike being stolen, they're obviously going to go with the former. But I still think that policing is another component in this. I've been pretty critical of the police because I think that, you could blame resources and political parties will blame each other. Most politicians are reluctant to directly blame the police, but I do think they deserve some blame themselves for the decisions that they're making, for their inconsistent policing, for skewed priorities. If the police can find time to harass people over, so-called hate speech, when it may well be, that is very much open to interpretation. If they find time to target people on those sort of things, yet they cannot find the time to deal with burglary or other crimes that really affect people, they have to answer to that. But I think, for the average person, and they don't even need to be a victim of crime, just looking at this, it is very, very frustrating and disillusioning, immensely so, because it feels like you're up against a big monolith, the legal establishment. And I'm aware that there is devolution in Scotland and Northern Ireland, regarding criminal justice. There are differences in some of the terminology and how sentences are determined. But I think there isn't much difference in the disillusion. I don't think there's much difference in the detachment between the legal establishments and the public. I would like to see all the legal systems on these islands get a lot more tuned into public opinion. Now, some things have improved on the Tories' watch. Um, for instance, we now have victims have a greater say in parole hearings. We have televised verdicts, but it's too little, really. There is so much more that needs to be done, and whether it be the Tories or Labour, they will talk tough. Starmer's talking tough, but I don't see any radical changes happening. I think until the whole system is shaken up, until judges and other people within the legal establishment really, really, really grasp public anger, then nothing's going to change. Um, I mean, who do they answer to? They certainly don't answer to the public. That to me is a problem. Um, am I saying that all judges should be elected? I'm not sure about that. I can see that there's pros and cons to any argument, because if they were elected, then you might have a situation where, as someone pointed out to me, you could have an area of London where there's a lot of conservative Muslims. They may then lobby for Sharia law. There could be things like that, but I think more broadly speaking, there needs to be much, much more accountability of those in the legal establishment. I mean, and it's a blame game, because legislators will say, "Oh, but we pass the laws. We cannot tell judges what to do. We cannot interfere with the judiciary." The sentencing councils, respectively, say, "We just set guidelines. Judges have discretion." Judges then say, "Oh, well, our hands are tied. We're just following guidelines." So it's a blame game. Someone is making these decisions. Someone is saying, "Well, we think a 24-year-old thug doesn't have full brain capacity." I think primarily, if I was to single out one party that was most to blame, it would probably be the respective sentencing councils. Although I do think there are ideologically weak judges out there. I had to laugh in the Times recently. They were criticising that judge who presided over the women supporting Hamas, and he gave them a community sentence. But it later transpired that he had liked an anti-Israel post. Well, that was a serious issue, because it got into question his judgment. He claimed he liked it by mistake. Um, but I had to laugh at the Times editorial. They said this undermines trust in the criminal justice system, as if there's trust to begin with, as if there is trust there. There isn't. I honestly, confidently feel if you done a vox pop on the street and ask people, "Do you trust our justice system?" the vast majority would say, "No, I don't. It's too soft." Now, victims of crime, you can't say everyone thinks alike. There will be even victims of crime who are ideologically on the left, and their knee jerk response will be rehabilitation, rehabilitation. Um, I'm not against rehabilitation, but after the fact, when crime has been committed, there has to be justice, there has to be punishment. And I'm sick and tired of this idea that punishment is somehow a bad thing, like it doesn't have a purpose. It does have a purpose. and it is not vengeance. We need to get away from this idea, like the left love to chirp out, that punishment's just revenge. It's not. It's justice. There is something fundamentally skewed about this mindset of let's look out for the interests of the criminal. Let's see how we can help them, not hold them to account. It makes me furious, to be quite honest. I mean, if you're in that situation of being, particularly crimes like you get a youth gang who's terrorizing someone, it's a very frightening experience. And anyone who thinks teenagers aren't capable of that, this isn't about demonizing young people. Often other teenagers are their main victims. But while I'm on the subject, there's another issue which is consistency in sentencing. The high-profile trial of Brianna Gay's killers recently was interesting. Now, I actually think that outcome was justified. They got very long sentences considering their age. I know people say it's not long enough, but compared to other cases, it actually is pretty long. They're going to be behind bars for 20 years. Good. It's well deserved. But why the lack of consistency? There's been other cases of youth gangs, violent youth gangs, killing other young people, and they get less than 10 years. The ringleaders, there was a case near my city where that was precisely the case. I think the public question that. Why is there a lack of consistency? Now, I know every case is unique. I know no two crimes are exactly alike, but there does seem to be a situation where some cases, despite being just as heinous, get longer sentences than others. It doesn't make sense. Or put it this way, I read about a train conductor in Liverpool who got 4 years behind bars because a young woman died in the tracks on his watch. To me, that was a tragic human error. He didn't go out to work that day to, kill a young woman. Yet you will get a vicious thug who assaults someone, maybe causes life changing injuries, who will escape prison. There's something fundamentally rotten about that lack of consistency. I'm not saying that a conductor shouldn't face some accountability for his negligence, but clearly it shouldn't be in the same category, or it shouldn't get a harsher sentence. Or if you get someone who takes the life of the partner in a case of euthanasia out of desperation, and then you get police cars turning up, yet they are nowhere to be seen when you get violent young offenders, there's just something fundamentally off with our justice system. And it's not the worst in the world, I'm aware of that. There's parts of the world where the corruption runs so deep, you won't see any justice, including for murder. So I'm not saying we have the worst system in the world, and I don't say that every single sentence is bad, it is misplaced. But I think as a whole, the legal establishment is woefully detached from public opinion, and they need to be pressured a lot more. Whether that means elected positions, whether that means more lobbying, I don't know. But I still feel it is just woefully detached from public opinion. It has to change. Um, and this is an ongoing battle. But I will support any politician who lobbies for tough justice because you cannot, you cannot have a situation where criminals feel emboldened and where they're given a green light to do as they please by soft justice. It's simple. When you hurt an innocent person, you have to pay a price, and that price has to match the gravity of the offence. At the moment, too often, it doesn't. Let me know your thoughts.